Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. My name is Anna. Andrei will be with us soon, so hang with us here. We see that people are still joining, so we're waiting a couple of minutes, 6 to be precise. Can you please share in the chat box, just as usual, where you're coming from and whether you're a teacher or a student. I'm sure there are lots of teachers, but recently we've been doing online lessons as well, and we've seen a mix of everyone coming to our webinars or online lessons. So the city you're coming from and whether you are teaching English or learning English. I know teachers are constantly learning as well, but just curious. Cities? We're here in Kiev at Great Education Center, so perhaps we have, we aim at actually getting all Ukraine with us in a webinar, and we had lots and lots of registrations, so hopefully it's going to become, and it is already, it's an international webinar already. We have Warsaw, we have Donetsk, we have, sorry if I mispronounce it, Raihorodok, if I say it correctly, Kharkiv. Okay, Odessa, great. Oh, I wish I could go. Wish we could be there, the sea and everything. Lviv, Priluki, okay, great. Muscat, oh man, oh wow, okay. Germany, oh cool. Currently a student, oh great. Yeah, so international. Poland, Germany, Oman, Dnipro, Mirnograd, okay. Nice to see you all. Cherkasy, okay, Rina is a teacher, great. Hello from Kiev, hello, hi, Poltava, perfect. Anyone from Zaporizhia? It's my native town. Oh, Toronto, wow, really, truly an international one. Hello, hi, Lena, hi. Hopefully everyone who is teaching, who's a teacher, is already either finishing or has already finished their school year. And I'm sure you've seen those funny pictures on Facebook with teachers on the last day of school dancing and, you know, throwing away everything and running from school. Okay. Lviv, okay. Moldova. One more country, great. Khmelnytsky, okay, yeah, we've recently visited that one. Okay. Kiev, okay, lots of people from Kiev, great. Pavlograd. Chernivtsi. Okay. So as far as I understand, we do have the majority of us is teaching. However, some of us are also students and learning. Absolutely, yes. So Andrei today is going to talk to us about 10 techniques to facilitate student engagement. I would say that this is the topic that relates to student motivation and their participation and involvement in the lesson, and not only. Hello from Sumy. Hello. Nice to see you. Okay. Andrei is joining us already. I'm just gonna let Andrei know that we have so many different cities and countries today in the webinar. Now we have...
I'm already here. Hello, everyone.
Hi, hello. Hi. So Bangkok, Poland, Germany, Canada, Oman.
Everyone around Ukraine. I'm so happy.
All over Ukraine, absolutely.
And you see some familiar faces already. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, and Odessa, of course. Yeah. Andrei, how are you? Have you survived your CELT? I'll just comment a bit. Andrei has
I'm actually in the process of it, you know, like I've just given an input session and now the webinar itself.
So you've just finished giving an input session. I thought it was the end of the course, wasn't it?
We do have 2 parallel courses, and on our course, it's still 1 more week. So, and
Still 1 week to go.
yeah. Sure.
Okay. Okay. Almost there. The 3rd week is usually the hardest one. I know from my experience.
Yeah.
First, everyone's
That's
like,
true.
oh, easy.
And you see here some CELT-P graduates who can confirm that.
I'm
I
sure.
already recognize 3 faces. Good.
Yeah. Yeah. So we can try and see if we can launch the presentation for now. We're going to wait.
Yep. Sure.
Still?
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah, works fine. Yes, I'll just walk everyone through Zoom. Used to do it all the time at the beginning of the webinar. I don't think right now we really need it, but just in case, if someone's doing it first time or hasn't been doing it a lot. So to the participants of the webinar, you have the screen, the main screen, and underneath the screen, you have a microphone and the video, and then you have the participants list. Sharing screen option is disabled for the participants. The organizer, Andrea, is the speaker, he's going to do that for us. And then you will also have a button with reactions. So if you can try right now and press underneath the video, not in the participants list, reaction, and give us a thumbs up, for example. Yep, we do see some thumbs up. Yeah. Oh, great. Thumbs up and clapping. Yeah, applause. Great. All right, so you can use those reactions if you want to strongly agree or, agree or support the speaker, then you can use those reactions there. Okay, and let Andrea know that you strongly agree with something or you think something is very useful. Now we have more than 100 participants, and I think it's not the end of it. People are going to join us more. I'm just going to tell you a couple of organizational moments. So we're going to send you the recording of the session after the webinar and the certificates. The emails, thank you. The emails will be out tomorrow, okay? So please bear with us, and you are going to receive something. If you don't receive an email by the end of the day tomorrow, please let me know. You have received the invitation from the email as@grade.ua. So this is my email, or esol@grade.ua. We're going to show you all the contact details at the end of the webinar as well. We are keeping our microphones off for the session. Okay, just because there are so many people in the webinar and we want to hear the speaker in the first place. So microphones off, cameras up to you, but we recommend them off as well for the sake of internet connection. The more people we have in the room with the cameras on, the more chances of something happening to the internet might occur. So we want to keep them off. But the mics are more important. I guess we're ready to start. Andrea, what do you think?
I think it's a good time to start.
Yeah, okay. Let's do that. I'll be here just around. I'll mute myself and let me know if you need anything. Okay?
Sure, thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right, hi again, everyone. I hope it's a good time to be joining the webinar. And thanks very much for actually being able to join us. And I hope that the webinar will be useful for you in many different ways. So before we actually start, I'd like to clarify a few important things. So I'm not an expert on engagement, right? I'm going to talk about engagement from the perspective of a practitioner, a teacher and a teacher trainer, and basically lots of observations that I've been making about how students are involved during a lesson by being a teacher myself and by helping other teachers actually give good lessons. So that's basically not from the theoretical perspective, but there will be a few important things. So when we talk about engagement, we actually talk about something which is related to motivation, which is related to involvement, which is related to how much we do and how much we're involved during lessons. And we are talking about students, of course. So you see here a series of pictures. In the chat box, can you please type in which pictures the students are not engaged? So let's check the chat box. Okay. Yeah, and by engaging, I mean engaging in the activities of the lesson, not engaging with something else, right? Yeah, actually, I think many of you are right. So if we talk about pictures from 1 to 5, sorry, 1 to 3, 5 and 6, we're talking about students who are not engaged, who are either disengaged, like for example, picture 1 and picture 6, because they are fully into something different. Number 2 as well. Or we're talking about students who are not fully engaged, like number 3, although the student is having the book open, right? The student isn't engaged in what is happening in class. And number 5, sometimes the situation that we have in class is basically a teacher's reaction to disengagement of the student, right? So we basically can track students' engagement by their involvement physically and by their involvement emotionally. Okay, how about this picture or these pictures? So where do you think students are not engaged? And again, can you please type just the numbers in the chat box? Okay. Oh, very interesting. Right, so we have different answers. So for sure, number 4, or not for sure, maybe I think 50-50. Number 4 looks like the student isn't engaged, or the student is engaged in their own thoughts, right? But it looks like the person or the student isn't on task. With number 1, some of you actually commented that I think this is this aha moment when a student has discovered something, which is, I believe, is related to what is being discovered or discussed now, right? With number 2, depends, right? But I think that this is about emotionally reacting to what's happening in class. And when we talk about 3 and 5, we're talking about basically group work activities. And if students seem to be interacting, which this actually means that they are engaged, right? But I actually agree with Natalia Laguta, my former CELT-P graduate. Hello, Natalia. So they engaged everywhere, but the level of engagement is slightly different when we talk about number 4, right? Okay, so again, we can make a conclusion that we can track or monitor students' engagement by what they are doing, by their emotions, and by their participation kinesthetically. Right. Okay, yeah, and 3 and 5 are collaborative engagement. True. Right. So when we talk about engagement, we can talk about different levels of engagement. For example, we can have a student who is actively involved, like the one on the left, and who is raising their hand in order to ask a question or answer a question, right? And we can see basically by the poster itself, level of engagement, right? And in the second picture on the right, we can see that the student is actually thinking about something, but I'm not sure that the student is engaged in the task itself. So let's imagine that both students are given a question, right? Yeah, engagement and involvement are in a way similar, right? So when we talk about the student on the right, I don't think that this student is fully involved, right? So we can actually talk about 2 different situations. Engagement, when students show either physically or emotionally that they participate in the process, they are on track. Or compliant, when students just tick the boxes. So for example, when they need to do this task individually, they do it. When they need to pair and check in pair, sorry, right, they do it, but they're not engaged emotionally, physically, kinesthetically, in other ways. So basically, mechanical engagement, a low-level engagement is called compliance. And this is what we might track oftentimes in the lessons where we as teachers might not be ourselves engaged emotionally in the process, right? And basically, an example of compliance is ticking the boxes. I have to do this, I do this, right? Might be that the student is engaged cognitively, right? But there is little evidence of this, at least in the picture. So when we talk about engagement, very general, we can talk about 3 levels of engagement. Cognitive, when the student is involved in the process of thinking, right? And it might be visible like in the example above, or it might be less visible when we talk about for example, thinking process, right? Hard to engage in the Zoom, in the webinar with lots of participants, agree, but still bear with me, please. Emotional engagement is basically when we react to what someone is saying. We are laughing, we're showing emotions, we like, we disagree, right? So basically this is involvement. And especially when everyone has the same reaction, right? It means that this emotion is universal and the students are engaged. And behavioral or cooperative engagement when students participate in pair, group work activities, kinesthetic activities, right? So basically it means being physically involved. And when we talk about our today's webinar, we'll be talking mainly about cognitive and emotional engagement. I'm a proponent of basically emotional engagement and like lots to do with psychological like basically teaching related to psychology, right? So I actually love these little things, and I'm going to share with you some maybe not secrets, but tips of how to engage students emotionally. So first one, let's start with bigger things. And this is what we might call motivation, or another way to call it is engagement factors. So I have here 6 different engagement factors. And in general methodology, we can talk about these as different motivators, and usually these are external motivators like teacher personality, when we are fascinated by the teacher themselves, by what they do, by the objects around, by the colors, right? By being asked personalized questions, by the task themselves, how engaging they are topically, or the kinds of activity, the format of the activity, right? We can talk about group dynamics when we just like cooperating with others, when we love sharing ideas, or something that comes usually from within when we see the result or when we see progress of what we're doing, right? So it's basically a sense of progress. So you can see some of you are taking notes, just don't be afraid, we'll share with you the slides, right? So you don't have to basically rush and take every note of that. So what I'd like you to do, I'd like you to think about your own preferences, maybe as a teacher, maybe as a student, and rank them in the order of importance. So with the first one being most important, and with the last one being least important. So let's take a minute or so and write these letters in the order of importance, from the most important to the least important. You can just write the letters in the right order, just the letters. Okay, we have CBF, GB, DFP, good. GFP, Oh, the answers seem to be very different. But I think that in the priorities we have A and C mostly, and I guess B and F. Right, okay. Yeah, very good. So from what I see, basically, A, B, C, and F seem to be probably more popular than others, right? Of course, it depends. So actually, I personally agree with A, B, C, and F, right? Like the factors might differ, right? But one thing to emphasize here is that it's very individual, it's very subjective, right? But I do agree with the point that all these have a great impact on what the students are doing, whether they are enjoying and their results, right? So basically, these are those bigger choices that we make, right? Apart from probably group dynamics, because it depends on the student. So actually, most of the things here depend on the teacher. And actually, the message that we could read from it is that basically a lot, but not everything, depends on what the teacher does in the lesson, how the teacher is prepared, and actually what kind of materials they are choosing and the approach, right? So actually the choice of these factors also affects engagement, right? And it might be some minor things, like a choice of visuals, right? Or it might be some bigger thing like group dynamics, and we don't have so much influence on that. But at the same time, it might be teacher personality, which I think is difficult to control, because when we have clash of personalities of a teacher, and a student, there is little we can do apart from having a conversation, figuring out what is wrong. No, by teacher personality, I don't mean preparation. I mean here basically the behavior of the teacher, the attitude, and something that comes from within, right? But by preparation, I mean choice of task and activities, choice of visuals, really, and video, right? So something that depends on the teacher. Personalization, when we talk about what kind of questions we ask, are we interested in the students as humans, not in just as students who are participating in the class, right? Yeah, with attitude, well, basically I agree with you, but at the same time, I can judge by myself. So if we talk about personality, right? Like I'm very, like I think I'm good at treating people, and it's part of my personality, right? Although I can change this attitude, right? So I agree with you to some extent here. So basically, when we talk about engagement, we can consider some bigger things, and we can consider some techniques, right? So basically, now I'm going to share with you some techniques that I've been trying, using, and experimenting with for some time now. And basically, I think that you might have had your own experience with that. And if you have any comments about that, so I'm actually happy to read them and basically respond to them. So number one is related actually to teacher personality or attitude, right? So when we talk about students, of course, we talk about rapport, right? The dynamics that we have with students, what we do to make students feel comfortable, right? So I'm sure everyone knows that, but something I would focus on here will be related to self-disclosure, meaning that I'm as a person have my own strengths and weaknesses, right? And I can be very formal, distant, right, from the students. So at the same time, I can share some little things about myself, right, which can actually set better contact with the students and actually create some rapport. So one thing that I usually share, for example, with my students is that in the first class, when we have some getting to know you activities, is basically that I'm forgetful about names. So I usually take notes of the names, and I say that I feel sorry if I don't remember names, right? So it's basically something that is true about me. And I know that students, can I please ask you to mute yourself for now and write your questions in the chat box, okay? I'm sorry, can we mute the microphones, please?
Yes, I'm gonna mute everyone.
Okay, right.
Тільки дуже древня, вона і дуже геніальна. А чому геніальна? Тому що і проста.
So the point here is basically about sharing some little things about ourselves, right, that we are ready to share. And basically it creates a better contact with the students, and actually they are participating more eagerly. And what is interesting is that when you share something personal with the students, students are usually eager to share something in return. And I think that makes this process a bit more comfortable for communication with each other. Right, okay. Yeah, building rapport, absolutely, right. So this is basically one of the first steps we can do to engage students in our emotional conversation and establish rapport with them, right? Yeah, so actually, I'd like you to think about one thing that you probably do as a teacher for self-disclosure, or something that you would like to try, and type this one thing in the chat box. So I'm eager to know what kind of things you do to build rapport with the students in this way. Yep, sharing true false facts. Yep, agree. Yep. So basically students get to know us as humans from the start, right? Not just the teacher who is teaching some grammar, right? Okay. Mariana says that she has the same problem with names. Okay, nothing wrong about that, nothing bad, right? So when we are sharing, we're basically telling the truth and students understand us, right? Nice on the forehead, right? Yeah, very nice activity, right? Let's talk about self-disclosure. So something that you say about yourself, right? Well, there is a question here about, is it only relevant for offline teaching? No, I think it's absolutely fine when you share with students in online teaching. Actually, I'd say that it even works better, because when we are at distance with our students, right, it's a bit more challenging to build rapport, and sharing some personal information, even some personal facts, right, is better for rapport online even, right? Star activity, right? Yep. Yeah. So we can talk about some kind of social chat at the beginning, right? When we share something about our weekends or something mentioned, right? Snowball game, right? So I'm happy that you're using this, right? So the main thing here is basically sharing something about ourselves, and typically students share something in return, and it helps us build basically tighter connections with them, right? Small talk, agree, absolutely, right? Okay, let's talk about the next thing. I really love one quotation here, and I'd like to share this with you. So when we talk about engagement and basically interest in learning as well as motivation, we can force students to study, or we can bring the horse to the water, right? But I'm not sure the students will actually learn in the same way as we cannot make it drink, right? We can provide the opportunity, right? But I'm not sure the students will take this opportunity and learn. So basically it's difficult to do this, but we can make students thirsty, right? Thirsty about the knowledge. So actually here we can talk about maybe adapting activities in a way, or even sell them in order to engage students in it. And just to illustrate that, I'd like to show you one of the units from the face-to-face intermediate course book at the upper intermediate level. This is a reading lesson where we have two tasks, right? So one task is basically focusing on main ideas when students read the task quickly, and reading is a bit longer here. Another one is, in a way, true or false statements, right? So how can we sell these tasks? So the topic itself sounds interesting because the students are focusing on the personality of the British, right? And this has to do with emotions, right? So what we can actually do in order to make students thirsty to read this, right? Okay, so basically one of the things we can do, we can actually set a leading. And usually when we talk about leading, we talk about personalized questions. When we talk about things related to themselves or their experience, right? So we talk about the British people here, right? So we can actually ask students to share some experience about their work or acquaintances with the British, right? Do they think they are friendly? Do they think they are unfriendly, right? Maybe share some stories of meeting those people, right? And in this way, basically focus on the topic, right? But ask students to share their own experience, right? And I have here a very nice point about telling a funny story. Yep. So if we have some personal experience with the English people, yeah, that would be really lovely. And actually another thing here is examples from the teacher, right? Yeah, so actually this is about generating some interest in terms of talking on the topic in a personalized way, or asking students to share some experience, right? And we can also bring some videos, right? We have a comment here from Natalie Laguta, right? So we can actually think about some pre-reading task, which will focus on sharing experience, right? Or being engaged in activities related to the topic, right? So basically lead-ins are usually a very nice way to engage students. And I would say that the result of the lesson, I think even by half, depends on how we set the tone from the very beginning, what we do to engage students and get them interested, right? So from this perspective, leading is actually a very important stage in any lesson, right? And basically spending enough time, I mean, just not 1 minute, but maybe a few minutes or more on the topic to discuss in the lead-in is actually a very important preparation in terms of psychological engagement, emotional engagement of the students, right? And being more involved in the reading process if we talk about these tasks, right? So being more selective and careful with the choice of the leading, the types of questions, activities, is something that gets students engaged in the task following the leading. Okay. Next one is something that I really love, which is related to actually leading, will be related to creating willingness to engage, meaning that in a way forcing students to want to do this or to actually, I would say, engage at different levels, right? So if student doesn't want to do something, right? So can we create this willingness for them to do this task? And something that can be done apart from what we have mentioned, something that I sometimes use, and I think that it might be helpful in terms of making the lesson cohesive, creating the so-called know, want to know, learn charts. So basically, this is about having a chart with 3 columns. One column, could I ask you to mute yourselves, please, because we have some background noise. So basically, we can talk about an activity. This can be at the start of the lesson, when we start a topic, before a reading or listening activity, when we get students to fill in parts of these columns for know and want to know. So for example, we talk about the British people, right? And what kind of character they have or personality. So in this situation, we can ask students what they already know about the British, and I think everyone knows that the British tend to be reserved, or at least this is the way other people perceive them. And something that they are eager to know throughout, for example, the lesson, right? So in this way, we will focus on what students are interested in, or referring back to this a bit later. And at the end of the lesson, once we have done these activities, we can actually refer back to these columns, know and want to know, and actually ask the students to fill in the column learn. So in this way, they will, in a way, summarize what they have learned, focusing on the topic, right? So basically, we in this way create some kind of cohesiveness. With the first 2 elements, this is about engagement, willingness to engage. And in the last one is actually, we have this point, let's finalize it, right? So this is something that could be done easily in reading lessons, listening lessons, so where you focus a lot on discussing topics. The next one, and I think it's quite a popular activity, is picture discussion. It might be directly related to the activity or it might be related to the topic, right? And this might have to do with one picture, right? What's happening there, predictions as for what happened a while ago, what's happening now, and it's going to happen, right? Or it can be a series of pictures that, for example, are connected to the topic, and students might guess what the topic of the lesson is, right? So again, it can be done open class, but I think with picture discussions, a good idea is actually to do it in pairs, because in this way, students will be more able to discuss their ideas, not just open class, a few ideas of their own, right? So also a good way to stir students' interest and willingness in the task. Another one is actually prediction, right? And one of them is focusing on some keywords from the topic, right? Especially when we talk about reading and listening. And it could be one of the activities we can focus on main ideas, right? So when we, and even connect it with the pictures, right? So we can focus on some keywords from the recording or from the text, get students to create their own stories or predict, and then listen to the recording or read the text and check those predictions. So usually we focus on basically checking predictions through a GIST task, right? So again, a good way to prepare for receptive skills tasks, right? The next one, something that I mentioned already. So when we talk about leading, yeah, a good idea is to personalize the questions, right? In order for students to share their thoughts, ideas, or experience, right? And final thing, related to KWL charts, it's basically about what students know, right, beyond this process, right? And then making sure that we, for example, create a spidergram or spider web, and we make records of students' ideas, right? And a good idea is actually to explore this spidergram and these ideas a bit later, for example, after the task, right? So actually all of these elements, in my opinion, and in my experience, right, actually prepare students and create some eagerness to engage with the task, right? And all of these can be called like the way of activating schemata, or someone is writing here, Lyubov, based on previous knowledge. Exactly. So we actually activate the schemata or previous knowledge of the topic that we're going to be focusing on, right? So I would like highlight the point here not to underestimate the beginning of the lesson in terms of pre-task activities. Then let's look at the quotation here from John Clark. I really like it because it actually talks about a few teacher roles in the classroom, right? So I think that many of you might agree that a teacher, a good teacher actually, is someone who in a way entertains, right? But I don't mean here being clown, but I mean here basically working with students' emotions, right? Engaging them with a joke, right? So in a way we do this, right? We don't have to, right? But this is actually something that affects engagement. But I think that a more important thing before being a good entertainer is actually being able to attract and then maintain students' attention. Because without students' attention, we're not sure that students are focusing and students are engaged. So I would say that attention is a prerequisite for any activity that we do with the students. So that's why I'm actually going to focus on that. And when we talk about attracting attention, actually attracting and maintaining, right? So by attracting, I mean actually making sure that students, let's say, are looking at us, are following us, right? Are not doing something else in order to, for example, start my instructions or start doing the task. So what we can actually do in order to attract and as a result maintain attention. So number one, and something that I really, really like, and I know that it might sound awkward, is actually silence. So I know at least there are a few people who did a CELT-P course with me, right? So basically you might have noticed that when I start to input, sometimes I just keep silent for like 30 seconds or something, right? So when students are facing you and they see that you are silent, right? They usually stop their activities and their attention is yours. And if someone isn't following, so then they go, okay, let's listen to the teacher, right? So silence is actually a good instrument of attracting students' attention and basically doing nothing, right? So basically having silence might mean or might be a good signal for the teacher actually to start doing something, right? But here I mean physically attracting their attention, right? Then something that I really, really love doing with bigger audience, especially when it's a workshop or let's say a workshop for wider audience, this is about asking for permission. So something like, do you mind if we start now? So actually nothing serious, but at the same time, when we talk about permission, so we give a signal that we're about to start. So I have a comment from Natalia Lagut. It doesn't always work at school, of course, right? Teenagers are a bit different, right? Although if students know that silence is purposeful, it might work, right? So when we talk about permission, it's basically giving students an indirect signal that we would like to start, right? And usually they answer, okay, okay. So in this way, they show that they are ready, right? So this is a little thing, and I would say a psychological thing, right? But it also helps attract attention. Next one. I actually don't want to underestimate eye contact with the students. And it's something that we talk about an offline class and as well as online class. Having students' attention often means that students are looking at us, right? So when we physically scan or monitor students' eyes and make sure that they're looking at us, this is something that ensures that at least physically they're focusing on us and are going to do what we set as a task. So basically one little step, physically checking if the students are looking at us, right? And one thing, like as an example, let's say to attract students' attention, I usually ask something like, at the first, for example, for the first time, like, what's the color of my eyes, right? And they immediately start looking into my eyes and checking what color it is, right? Although it's difficult to guess because the color of my eyes is blurred. It's like blue-grayish, right? Okay, next one will be nominated questions. And I'm talking here about maintaining attention. So this can be done when we have open class stage, when a teacher works with students together, right? So some students might be engaged and they are willing to answer, maybe even call out their answer or raise their hand, whereas others might just keep silence, right, and do nothing, or at least like they're not involved. So nominated questions, when we ask a question and say who's going to answer, is something that keeps students on tiptoes, right? So basically, when we talk about teacher training, we call it nomination, right? So the main thing is here to make sure that everyone is kept alive and everyone is kept on tiptoes, right? So usually in class, we have students who are more active, who are less active for different reasons, right? And when we don't nominate, usually one and the same students participate in open class stages, which actually means that others might be not involved or maybe might not be willing to share. But at least when we nominate, we make sure that they are physically engaged, right? Of course, there are some prerequisites. If, for example, this is an unexpected question with no time to think, this might be off-putting. So that's another question, right? But nominated questions actually help students remember that a teacher can ask them any question all the time. It's a bit forced, right? But I think if it's done gently, it might work, right? Another thing is about monitoring. So basically, when we talk about individual work, I'm talking here mostly about offline classes, because with online, that's a little bit different. When we talk about students working individually or in pairs or in groups, right? One of the roles of us as a teacher is actually making sure that students are on task. They're doing what they are supposed to do by the task, right? They have enough ideas. They have the language to work, right? So basically, I'm meaning here going around the room, listening to what the students are doing, and actually, if the students need our help, so then provide it. And by this, I mean here, prompting if they don't have any ideas, helping them with language. If students, for example, have run out of ideas to discuss in a speaking task, that's a very good thing actually to focus on this, right? So I would say that these are little things. Some of them are maybe more important than others, but I think that help keep students' attention or keep them engaged, both physically and maybe a little bit emotionally, right? Then I'd also like us to focus on two things. When we talk about, let's say, a class, a general English class, there are situations when we give students lots of information, right? When we actually explain, when we report things, right? But when we report things, and actually when our stories or explanations are long, then students' engagement actually gets low, right? So basically, the level of engagement is low. So that's why when we ask questions, right? So instead of sharing a story, ask questions, or maybe have an understanding of something. So then we basically keep students on tiptoes. So elicitation or asking questions is basically, could I ask you to mute yourselves? Thank you. So when we talk about eliciting, right? So it's a useful technique to keep students engaged. And by soliciting, I actually mean saying a lot. And when we talk about teacher training, so we use the term something like teacher talking time. So I wouldn't say it's wrong, right? But if there is a lot of teacher talking time, or the teacher fills the lesson with a lot of themselves, so then probably students' engagement drains with time. And I know that oftentimes when, for example, we start a course with a teacher who talks a lot, we are good because the teacher's engagement techniques are high because of emotions, right? But then when this teacher talking time is still high, then students get drained and quickly get disengaged, right? So this elicitation or asking questions rather than saying a lot, right, is a useful technique. So basically asking questions before you start a topic is also part of elicitation. Another technique, and you see it in the heading top and tail, is related to feedback or is related to open class discussions. So oftentimes you might come across a situation when students answer, the teacher accepts the answer and then adds a lot. So basically adds a lot on top of that. And I know from the experience of my students, sometimes they say something like, I have a feeling that my answer is wrong because you actually in a way corrected me and added a lot, right? So here the point is, if a student gives a good answer, but the wording or the way they phrased is not the same as what you were intending to receive, right? Might be not a good idea to rephrase it or to add, right? It might be a good idea just to accept that this is a good answer, right? And topping also increases our echoing if we repeat, but that's another story, right? So for example, if I'm asking for different kinds of engagement, right? And you're giving me right answers. So my strategy would be to accept them, right? Rather than adding a lot to them, because you might have this feeling that you're saying something wrong or not enough. If this is not enough, we could probably elicit more information, right? And when we talk about feedback, it's basically one of the typical ways we react to students' answers. So this is basically something like an internal desire to add something or to correct students, right? But if the answer is wrong, right, a good point would be to accept it and elicit if necessary, rather than add a lot on top of that. Then, another thing about this quotation from someone unknown, right? And here, I'm actually meaning about waiting. I'm meaning waiting time here. So this has to do with the feedback stage when we listen to students' ideas. This has to do with the questions that we ask. So let's imagine the following situation. So for example, when we set a task for students to read for main ideas, and we check students' understanding of the task. So we ask how to read for gist, right? So basically students know the procedure we just elicited. Students say read quickly, but the teacher here thinks that this is not enough. And the teacher actually is going to provide a more thorough answer. There are actually two ways out here. One of them is actually to insert some wait time. By wait time, I mean just keeping silent or making a pause for at least a few seconds, right? So for example, we've made a question, let's wait. Especially when this is a question with no preparation time for students, I'm not sure that there are lots of students who can answer this question immediately. And when we talk about this immediate answer, there's a very nice observation about extroverted and introverted students. Usually, extroverted students think in the process of talking. So they will be eager to raise a hand or to give the answer, right? And actually in the process of giving, they will figure out the right answer. Whereas introverted students usually need some wait time, thinking time, rehearsal time, right? So basically time to think and to formulate ideas. So the idea here is if we give some time for students after the question and maybe wait for more than one answer, or say to the students, I'll give you 10 seconds to think, don't give the answer now, right? So then basically you provide this thinking time or wait time. Another thing is about wait time too. So after the student has given the answer and we think it's not enough, let's again insert a small pause of a few seconds, right? I know from an article from an IHH World website that if a teacher waits for longer than 5-7 seconds, the number of better answers, more in-depth answers, increases basically much more. So I would say like geometrical progression, right? Exponential. So which actually means that this wait time is very important. And if we apply this wait time, so students might answer something like this. So actually, they will have more time to think about these ideas and to formulate them, right? So this is my point about wait time. Number one, this is about waiting time after questions. Number two, this is about waiting time after the initial answer, right? So basically, having more time to think produces more ideas. Think, pair, share, exactly. This is actually part of the technique. So when we talk about think, pair, share, we give students more time to think, right? So here I'm talking about the first think stage, right? So just inserting a pause. Does the speed of the lesson depend on students' personality? In a way, yes, because when we talk about open class discussions, usually introverted people, students need more time to think, right? And then if, for example, only those who are more dynamic, more dominant will answer, so then these people might not participate. If we want to listen to everyone's opinion, that might affect the pace of the lesson, right? But if we insert these pauses, and you've probably noticed that I'm talking about slight pauses, like a few seconds, up to 5 seconds, right? So that actually might increase the depth of processing the questions and better answers. Another technique that I'd like to share with you is connected with challenge and variety. Something that I'm sure you're very familiar with, and this is something that we think about when we are looking at the tasks that are in the book while preparing for the lesson. So let's imagine that we have this gap fill task, which actually practices conditional to sentences, right? So depending on the level of our students, whether stronger, weaker, or the group itself, we might think about different tasks that will be more challenging or less challenging. Or it also has to do with the types of practice activities that we give, right? So if we focus on similar types of things like gap fill all the time, it might not be engaging, especially when students already have done lots of tasks like this. So basically thinking about the challenge, the level of challenge of the task, and adding variety is something that is useful while planning. And let me illustrate that with a few ideas. So number one, when we talk about physical engagement or behavioral engagement, we might want students to stand up, go around the room, and the tasks are on the walls, either like separate sentences or like a few sentences, right? So we call this art gallery walk. So basically the interaction pattern is slightly different. It's not a completely new activity, but students are engaged physically, right? And they're working with the partner, right? So it actually allows for a more variety in terms of interaction pattern, right? With challenge, probably no. Next one, we could actually, instead of giving them a task on a handout, give them slips, right? And again, it caters for kinesthetic learners, right? Because actually it's more pleasant sometimes for them to, let's say, work with the slips rather than write something on a handout. Tic-tac-toe might be a good activity for controlled practice activities. So when students have, for example, 6 sentences, right? They choose, for example, the sentence by playing tic-tac-toe, right? Or deciding who will be answering it. Like a game-like element might take a bit more time, but the level of engagement is actually a bit higher here. And then talking about here, emotional and physical engagement. Correcting mistakes generally is a different variety of this completion task. Although I wouldn't use it for the beginning because students are not used to the form of the target language, right? So it might be a good idea to do it a bit later, so as the second practice activity, right? Especially when already students know the rules and can apply them. Then another one for practice activities could be having stems or having words and get students to make a sentence, right? So it's basically less controlled activity, right? But still it's like one of the types of controlled activities. So instead of giving them a gap fill task, we can do this, and the level of challenge is slightly different, and I would say a bit higher, right? And here we talk about ordering basically sentences. Another one, a higher level challenge task will be actually completing activities, right? Completing sentences, sorry. So instead of giving them the full sentence and inserting the verb in the right form, how about asking students to give their own idea and use them in the correct form, right? So basically, I would say a bit more personalized and in this way, a bit more engaging activity. And another one, when we talk about controlled practice activities for conditional sentences, this is about chain story. When one student starts, right, and gives a sentence, the second student, for example, makes the second part. For example, we had the sentence this moment, if I could see the future, I would help the humanity, right? The first student gives the sentence. The second one says, if I could help the humanity avoid disasters, I would. So basically they choose the second part of the first sentence, turn it into a conditional sentence and continue. So it's a more challenging task than just completing the sentence. And it's a good, basically, we call it semi-controlled practice, when it involves element of form, but at the same time, there is some flexibility, right? Less controlled task. Next one, let's have a look at this task. Art gallery walk is when students get up, they have tasks or bits of tasks on the walls. They might go around the room in pairs or individually and do the same task. Next one. Next one will be about genuine interaction. So when we talked about actually self-disclosure when we shared with students some important personal information, right? So when we talk about interaction with the students, we talk about actually communicating as humans, as people, right? And actually being frank with the students. So when we talk about this interaction, and I think that in some lessons it's quite typical, when we ask students some personal questions like about their weekend, right? The student would share the answer, but what the teacher could do. They could actually say something like, "Good, okay," and it immediately stops the conversation, which actually doesn't help make the conversation genuine or doesn't show the teacher's genuine interest in what the students are saying, right? So we talk about, again, rapport, right? But this element, when we extend on this conversation a bit or reacting, is really helpful. So the answer that the teacher could give could be something like being interested, right? And eliciting more information, right? Because the student is able to share more of personal information. So I truly believe that this genuine interaction helps teachers build better rapport, right? But that's a little thing, right? We can do this at the start of the lesson when students share something personal. We can do this at the beginning, at the end of the lesson when we usually have more personalized conversations. So basically, this helps again build this more solid rapport with the students, right? And again, keep students engaged. And I would say that this is basically psychological engagement, right? More personalized engagement. One more thing that keeps students engaged, and I think that's connected with one of the engagement factors, is exit feedback. So for example, this is an example, just a moment, we have a question, I guess. Yeah, genuine interaction is gold. I absolutely agree with you. So basically, I think it's something like #1 when we talk about communicative class and actually rapport with the students, right? Okay, exit feedback is actually a very nice technique which will require you just a few minutes, but will help students feel or have a sense of progress. So for example, today, we talked about a few activities, and I don't have all of them, but there are a few more of them, right? Few techniques of engagement, right? And I'd like you in the chat box to respond to these questions. So what was new for you out of these techniques? Is there anything you'd like to try? Or is there anything you'd like to know about? So can you just type a few words in the chat box, please? Let's take a minute or so to do it. Okay, can you hear me? So I guess someone doesn't have sound. Okay, so when we talk about tic-tac-toe, this is ticks and crosses. Kristik and Nolik is something that we know from our childhood. So it's basically you create redesign a control task based on these ticks and crosses. Okay, so can you please specify what was new for you and what you would like to try? Because I see here you have ideas, but you don't specify. Yeah, activating schemata. So we'll have a slide there, right, about different activities that we could do to generate students' interest and basically check what the students know. Yeah, elicitation needs more practice. Agree, absolutely. Yeah, top and tail is actually a very nice technique. And actually, to tell you the truth, and I'm sharing, I'm like self-disclosing. Actually, I learned about it like something like a year ago when I was reading some teacher training literature, right? So it's something that we might do unconsciously or even subconsciously, right? But at the same time, it's something that actually prevents us from having good conversations sometimes with students. Okay, top and tail. So when we talk about top and tail, when students give their answers to some questions, right? So we might think that this answer is not enough and we start adding or correcting or changing the answer. So it means basically instead of accepting the answer, which is actually good, but might be phrased a bit differently, we give our own answer. So instead of basically saying that this is a good answer, we give our own answer. This is basically having a lot on top of the students, of what the students have said. Yeah, so I'm really happy that you've mentioned lots of things, and actually this exit feedback is something that I'm using now to check how well you were engaged in this conversation. So I remember someone commented at the beginning that it's difficult to engage in a webinar online through Zoom, but at the same time, by the responses you're typing, I can see that at least the answers that I see, some of you were engaged, right? Totally engaged. Nice to hear that. Okay. Yeah, change and variety is about basically adapting activities, right? So you can use this exit feedback in order to start your next lesson, know what to do with it. So for example, if we're talking about grammar, right? And now we see that students have missed something or didn't get something. So next time we could focus on that. So exit feedback actually helps check what students have mastered and what students need to know about still, right? So actually this is a useful technique to see what has been covered, check in a way the level of engagement, right? And build on it the next lessons, right? Okay, all right. One more thing that I'd like to share with you. This is the quotation that I really, really love. And this is something that tells the difference between different kinds of teachers, right? So someone who is a great teacher gives not just good examples, not just demonstrates, but this teacher inspires, right? And this has to do with rapport. This has to do with positivity, emotions, smiles, humor, attitude. So I think that those teachers who we remember for a long time are most likely to be great inspirers, right? Those who spot positive things, those who notice development, those who notice students' progress. So those are teachers who are inspiring. So I wish you to be inspirers for your students. And I wish you basically to reach the top level of this ladder from basically to become a great teacher for your students. And now we have a few minutes and I'm ready to answer your questions that you probably will type in the chat box. Yeah, so those who are leaving, so thank you very much. In a moment, I'll share with you a few links, a few books that I personally find useful for engagement. Right. Okay, so thank you very much for your comments. So checking homework, what's the best technique for that? So something that we use, for example, at Great, where I'm a teacher and teacher trainer. So what we usually do, we check what students don't know, basically basing on students' answers or questions, right? So instead of going through the procedure, right, we might just ask, do you have any questions? Or maybe ask some more specific questions about specific tasks. Of course, there is a chance that students won't do that. But at the same time, I think if some students are really interested and we focus on answering their questions, I think in this respect, those who don't do the tasks will be a bit more motivated because actually they don't have questions, they don't progress, right? So by talking about what they did and how they did that, right, is a good idea. Of course, when we talk about checking homework, when it's important for improving students' understanding in practice, you might give another task which is similar to the task for homework, and in this way check how well they have been able to apply the skills, or how well they now understand, for example, this piece of language, or how well they can do this skill now, right? Okay. Yep, so Yulia, I think that literally checking every exercise isn't necessary unless there's something important in terms of practicing, right? But I wouldn't waste lots of time on checking every single exercise and every single, for example, sentence. Okay, so thanks very much for your very positive and inspiring comments. At least now I'm absolutely sure that some time spent on preparing this webinar wasn't spent in vain, and I see that some of you are at least better inspired now. Okay, thanks very much. Why not giving them the key and swap the notebooks for checking? Actually, I prefer giving keys to the students and actually having the keys in the workbook or in the teacher's book and get the students to check these at home, right? It's basically one step to make our students more autonomous, which of course isn't flawless, but at the same time, it kind of develops their skill of being responsible for what they do, right? For home tasks. We can start with giving keys, but then provide more autonomy to the students. Great, thank you so much for your nice comments. I'm still here. If you in case have any questions, and a few final slides with useful links. So something that you can find online, so a few sources and books. And if we talk about the second source, Engaging Learners, so this is a book that has been issued very recently. I think it was issued in late March or at the beginning of April by Sarah Mercer. She is one of the experts of engagement, and she gives webinars and IATEFL talks on engagement. So if you're interested in these things, so please have a look and check her webinars and maybe even buy the book on Amazon. I'm going to buy it actually because I'm really interested in that, related to that. This is one thing, and another slide is about activities. So I was talking about ideas, but there are a few books that you can use to actually increase students' engagement in different ways, through critical thinking, through motivation, through learning preferences, or through creativity. Okay, right, so we have probably a few questions. How do you divide your classes? Do you dedicate more time to speaking vocabulary, grammar, or other activities? Well, basically, I try to have a balance of that, because if we have too much language and little practice for skills, that's probably not the best choice. So combining, for example, language lessons with productive follow-ups or freer practice activities, right? Speaking or writing, or maybe giving speaking lessons to balance, right? And see if they can use actually the language. So actually, the key answer will be to your question, how do you listen? Balance. And it also depends on the curriculum and the book, right? If, for example, your book has lots of grammar, so probably it's a good idea to negotiate this. And do you actually want to teach all the grammar there? Because sometimes you may end up teaching everything. I mean, every single lesson will be devoted to teaching grammar and vocabulary. Okay, so I hope I've answered all your questions. So again, thanks very much for bearing with me for this almost 1 hour. I hope the ideas were useful and you're ready to apply some of them in your near lessons, right? Thanks very much again. Be inspired and hope to see you in some other webinars. Thanks very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye, Valentina. Yeah, take care, Lyubov.
Well, goodbye, Andrei.
Yeah, sure.
Your webinar was very useful. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye. Goodbye, everyone. Okay, so goodbye, everyone. So looks like we can finish the webinar now. Okay, so thanks again very much.
написать, что I didn't really understand how this deal works, или что?